everybody. We're so glad to have y'all. Thank you for real people that have come out. That means the world to us. And we've got a lot of folks joining us online too. So hi, Michael. Hi. So let me say a few words about the center and what we're doing here, and then I'll intro Michael. So I'm Marcie Cohen Ferris. I'm Professor Emeritus in American Studies here at UNC, and I'm Interim Director of UNC's Center for the Study of the American South. And I want to tell y'all that our incoming director is historian Blair L.M. Kelly. She is the Joel R. Williamson Distinguished, and she's very distinguished Professor of Southern Studies in the American Studies Department, and she will join us as CSAS's incoming director in July 2023. And be on the lookout for Blair's new book called Black Folks, which is being released this July, and it looks at the history of Black working class in America. And I've been reading it, and it's fantastic. It comes out of Blair's life and her family, which we were talking a lot with, is where narrative and story really has to begin with is your own life. So just a bit about the Center for the Study of the American South. We're located at the corner of East Franklin and Battle Street. It's a white historic house with a wraparound front porch, and we invite you to come and visit us there. It's a hub for interdisciplinary research and scholarship and teaching about a very evolving American South. And our work there connects campus and community through public programs like tonight, grants and fellowships for students and faculty, a lot of regional outreach, an award-winning quarterly publication, Southern Cultures, which I hope you'll subscribe to if you're not subscription folks yet. Much of Southern Cultures is available online as well, and it will turn 30 years old next year, so we'll be doing a lot of anniversary events in its honor, as well as the Southern Oral History Program, which is part of CSAS, and next year it will celebrate its 50th anniversary of documenting the U.S. South by recording and preserving the voices of the region, which has been our theme for 2 days. We're also home to the Pan University program, Southern Futures, which supports Southern-focused scholarship and programs that look at justice and possibility, as well as the student-initiated Critical Ethnic Studies Collaborative, which meets at CSAS every week. So tonight's event is part of the Center's James and Marguerite Hutchins lecture series, and we're really deeply grateful to Glenn Hutchins for this gift that he gave in honor of his parents, who are alums, and their outstanding contributions to UNC. And I want to also thank our co-sponsors for this evening, Professor Kelly Alexander, I think she's might be here somewhere, and the Department of American Studies, the Carolina Center for Jewish Studies, NC Hillel, and Rabbi Melissa Simon. I know the rabbi is here somewhere, there she is, and Executive Director Hannah Gutterman-Spinrad. And finally, I want to thank Carolina Dining Services Executive Chef Michael Geis, and throughout this week, CDS has featured Michael's Swahili, is that correct? Swahili. Roasted chicken, which is amazing, and red rice from your book, Kosher Soul. And thank you also to the director of the Sonia Haynes Stone Center, Ron Manigault-Bryant, and all the staff here for their hospitality. We're really grateful to Paul Bonanici and also for sound and Zoom, and to CSAS's staff, to Terry Laurent and Claire Bider and Melody Hunter-Pillion for their support for this evening. And also I want to thank Chapel Hill's beloved Bimala, who's right here in the second row, and Curry Blossom Cafe for the delicious reception that you provided. And tonight is certainly also an extension of Pride Week 2023, whose theme at Carolina this year is Connection for Community, for Change. And it really was a special year this year in honor of the LGBTQ Center's 20th anniversary here at UNC. And I hope a few of you got to see, or maybe lots of y'all got to see the Story of Us performed this past weekend, which was kind of a reader's theater collection of interviews that were of oral history interviews that were conducted by Hooper Schultz, who is a doctoral student in the history department and a field scholar for SOHP, and brought together actors, UNC alum, who were all UNC alum, together to share folks' experiences from the LGBT community who were part of the Carolina community. There we go. So let's have a talk. So first, let me tell you about you. Michael Twitty is a culinary historian and journalist and writer, and I really think Michael at this point is someone that needs no introduction. When he's not traveling, which is quite a bit, whether it's to California or Tennessee or Mississippi this week to Holly Springs, or he's going to Africa. And he's been there how many times?
8.
8 times. He lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia with his husband, educator Taylor Keith, and their dog, Felix.
And their cat, Dodger.
And their cat. What's the name of the cat?
Dodger.
Oh, Dodger, the artful Dodger. So Michael's first book, The Cooking Gene, A Journey Through African American Culinary History in the Old South, published in 2017 by HarperCollins, traces his ancestry through food. It's part of a trilogy now, and we'll talk more about that. From Africa to America and from slavery to freedom. It was a finalist for the Kirkus Prize, and it won the 2018 James Beard Award for Best Writing and a second James Beard Award for Book of the Year, which seldom, if ever, has happened.
Right.
And it made you the first Black author so awarded that by the Beard Foundation. His Bon Appetit essay on visiting Ghana was included in the volume Best Food Writing in 2019. It was nominated also for a 2019 James Beard Award. And I know folks know a lot about the James Beard Foundation, but it is like the Oscars for the world of food, for writers, for food entrepreneurs, for journalists, for chefs, and more. Michael is also the author of this wonderful little volume called Rice. It's part of the UNC Press's over 20 book series, the Savor the South series of critical ingredients of kind of the culinary grammar of the American South. But this one in particular was a 2021 New York Times noted cookbook book. And then Kosher Soul, which we're here tonight to talk about. The Faith and Food Journey of an African American Jew was released last August by HarperCollins. It received the 2022 National Jewish Book Award. That's the most important award of that association, making Michael the first Black Jewish author to receive that important recognition.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Michael was featured in Dr. Skip or Henry Louis Gates' sweeping 2013 PBS History of Black America that I bet a lot of folks saw, Many Rivers to Cross. You guys were in a great conversation about African American foodways. You've been on a lot of, in media and television, Chef Padma Lakshmi's fabulous series, Taste the Nation. I love that program. And you were a guest also on Michelle Obama's magical children's food series, Waffles and Mochi, on Netflix. You're a National Geographic explorer, you know, like whatever that means. A TED Fellow, a member of the 2022 Time 100 Next Class, and a Southern Foodways Alliance Smith Fellow at the University of Mississippi in Oxford. He served as a historical consultant on the FX adaptation of Octavia Butler's amazing novel, Kindred. And I did think that was just incredible.
Thank you.
And paid a lot of attention to the food in it. And you also have an online masterclass in the masterclass series, Tracing Your Roots Through Food. So let's talk.
Sure.
We've known each other a long time.
Long time.
A long time, since the late 1990s, which doesn't seem so long ago, when I was in graduate school in Washington, D.C. with my husband, Bill. He was doing something else in D.C. You were, I don't know, like 5 years old, or maybe Michael was 5 and brilliant. And maybe he was a little older, but he was teaching Judaic studies and Hebrew to Jewish students in synagogues and day schools in Rockville, Maryland. And he was also interning at the annual Smithsonian Folklife Festival. And it was Joan Nathan, who I was getting to know, who's the great journalist of American Jewish foodways for the Times, has written numerous award-winning books on American Jewish cuisine and global Jewish cuisine. We came together in her kitchen. And so we bonded, I think, as Southerners and as Jews and as folks that have been sometimes othered or had kind of moments of being outsiders in our own worlds. But we were searching, I think, for the voices of our people, for their histories, and we both were discovering at the same time that food was a lens onto the Jewish experience, onto our Southern experience, and we were like, there you are. There you are. So we've used food as a way of understanding region and religion and identity. So I thought I'd ask you first just to kind of go to identity with me for a minute, and we do like a really quick word association kind of thing.
Sure.
Okay? So I'm just gonna throw a bunch of stuff at you, and you've got a few seconds to just what comes to mind.
Okay.
Okay, ready? Okay, here comes the first one. Black.
Africa at the center. Always foremost, always will be. And I'm saying that especially in light of certain comments certain people have made. There is no black without the mother. Until you've been to her and been in her heart, you don't understand there is an absolute eternal connection between that place and her people and her children that have been sent around the planet. Black is long prayers before you eat. Black is showing up 20 minutes late, but still being on time. Black is a look from your mother and there's no such thing as timeout. Black is a look from your father that means the world to you, that makes you feel that you've matured, that you have pride. Black is the nod you give to other people on the street. Black is that when you linger, when you see a cop approach another person of color and you want to make sure they're okay. Black is vibrating to a different tone. Black is an understanding that if you had to choose another body, you still choose the black body you're in because it's home, despite all the issues. Black is being black without reference to whiteness.
Yeah.
Being black on its own terms. Black is food that has flavor. Black is ecstatic worship. Black is expressing love through food. Black is have a relationship with your ancestors. Yeah.
That's good. It's beautiful. All right, here comes the next one. Jewish.
Oi.
Why don't you start with oi? Okay.
Jewish is mishpacha. Jewish is not a religion. Jewish is the religious civilization of the Jewish people. Jewish peoplehood comes first. It's not my church, it's not my faith. It is my relationship to Abraham and Sarah, and every other Jew's relationship to Abraham and Sarah. It's being at Har Sinai. when the commandments were given, which to us is like it happened yesterday. It actually happened in Shavuos. But Jewish is, if you don't perfectly keep kosher, knowing what kosher really is, it's a relationship to tradition. It's not there's no such thing as an Old Testament in our world. It is the Tanakh, it's the Hebrew Bible, it's the living word, the living God. It is the challenge of both tradition and the challenge of dynamic change. It is knowing that our tradition cannot live without change, and also knowing that we cannot live without some adherence to our customs, our laws, our understanding of the world. Being Jewish is tikkun olam, repairing the planet, repairing the world. Being Jewish is empathy. It is tolerance. It is social justice. It is the cry of the orphan, the widow, and the homeless. Being Jewish is when you break your eye whatever, and you walk into the store and the other person across the way is Jewish, and you explain to them that you use it to play songs in Hebrew school, and they immediately give you a new one, and replace it.
Yeah.
Being Jewish is being caught in the rain right before Passover, and a bunch of Moroccan Israelis say, "Get in the car, we'll drive you wherever you need to go." Being Jewish is an understanding. It's, do you have a place for Shabbos? Do you have a Seder to go to? Do you need a yard side candle? Being Jewish is family. Yeah.
And Jewish and black together, exhausting.
Exhausting, but it is the smell of challah and chicken and collard greens all at once. It is giving people like high fives and hugs at Rosh Hashanah. It is, R&B and gospel notation when you sing Adon Olam. It is going to the Western Wall and seeing Ethiopian Jews, and they say, Shalom Achi. Being black and Jewish is not just being Sammy Davis Jr. Being black and Jewish is knowing that there's a lot of us, but we're the hidden group. We're one of the largest groups of so-called biracial black people. People don't know that. Oh, they don't understand that. But being black and Jewish is also, so how come you're Jewish? Or Shabbat Shalom, thanks to you, or same to you. Being black and Jewish is, are you really Jewish? Did you convert orthodoxly? Which I did. Being Jewish is, black and Jewish is also people going, you don't believe in Jesus? Being black and Jewish is, so you want to be everything but black, don't you? Being black and Jewish is also, oh, you're so exotic and interesting. Mm-hmm. Being black and Jewish, finally, is understanding that you have two sets of antennae you wear at all times about anti-Semitism and racism. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Bedfellows, that's what they are.
Yep.
Queer.
Queer is not the same thing as gay. Queer is, on its surface, non-normativity. Deeper level, non-heteronormativity. It's what bonds me with my lesbian family. It's what bonds me with my non-binary family. It's what bonds me with my trans family. It's what bonds me with other gay men who don't really share my outlook and worldview or path. But we are still different. Queerness is also the queerness of blackness in a Eurocentric society. Queerness is also the queerness of Jewishness in a Christological society. It's, what are you building in your backyard? You're getting off of work for Rosh what? I've never heard of that before. It's that idea. It's oh, the Jews make love through sheets. No, there are tzitzis. There are sacred shawls that we would hang up on the clothesline, and you Fleischmann Eugen, thought that it was a bed sheet. That's Yiddish for you're so dumb you're like meat with eyes. It's all of that. It's why don't those black kids stay still? Why can't they just? Could we vibrate to a different tone? That's queerness is all of that. It's all of those things for me bound up. It's me wearing these tights. It's me being different.
Right.
Because I want it. Because I can be. Because my duty to not waste 1 second of the short human life that I have been given. Yeah, that's queerness. And queerness is also knowing that you are different and trying to figure out for your entirety of your existence, from your childhood to your elderhood, how you're going to navigate that no matter what people think of you. Queerness is me coming out of my school newspaper at 16 years old. Now I'm 46. That's 30 years of being out of the closet. Yeah.
And you said, and gay.
Gay. Gay is unicorns and rainbows and glitter. Gay is, okay, if I'm gonna be real with y'all, gay is being at a table with a bunch of male friends and everybody's like, oh, did you all just meet the florists? And no, we all had sex together at some point. Listen, if the world is going to be homophobic and transphobic, queerphobic, I'm gonna be damn real. The reason why we as a community stop monkeypox in its tracks is because we know the deal. To us, certain things are a handshake. I ain't going to elaborate. But it's a process. It's being gay is going to the club and meeting older men who are very platonic with you, who will teach you the way not to go. People to avoid, things to not do, so you can stay alive. It's the black gay men who kept me alive to this point. Being gay is the fact that I can go to anywhere in the world and meet people of different colors, different backgrounds, different religions, and we all share the same reality. We all had to confront our self-difference. Being gay is that 6-year-old who has his hand on his hip in the picture, who some people laugh at, some people think it's cute, and some people think it's terrifying. I remember Jake Shears of Scissor Sisters once read this beautiful long poem, and it was a stunning line. And the line was, "Being gay is being 6-year-old and wearing your mother's heels," and she breaks it and cries because she thinks you're going to die of HIV. For somebody who grew up in the 80s, that's real.
Right.
Being gay is everybody, black folks going, that's his friend. What's your friend name? let his friend sit next to him. And being gay is also when your friend gets up to make your plate and your mama stops him dead in his tracks. I ain't ready for that. I'll make his plate. You don't make, Y'all know what that means, right? The significant other makes the plate.
Yeah.
Being gay is
in all cultures.
Yeah, but especially black culture.
Yeah, I know.
Don't let your sister-in-law make your no, ma'am. She could be fixing his food.
Yeah.
Not good. Being gay is crying when you see PFLAG parents and supportive siblings and teachers. It's people who make you feel. It's children who look at you and go, I don't care. That's nice. Next subject. Being gay is also adults who have their own issues and don't want nobody to know that we know that they know that they. I don't buy people. I don't even believe in homophobia anymore. I believe people have unresolved issues about their own vulnerability regarding human sexuality.
Right.
And I think we do ourselves a disservice as queer people about being so shy about our TMI moments, when if the world's going to get after us for displaying rainbows, then all bets are off. Meet me at Whole Foods and see what happens. So, being gay is, 4 lesbians, some chickpeas, some lentils, and a potluck. Being gay is also, 2 men, fresh pasta, risotto, 1 cart. Draw your own conclusions. Or 3 if you're lucky.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and you embrace it all.
Yes. We have another one, don't we?
Yeah, I do have one more, but I always think like, your mother of blessed memory, she might have said, and I'm sure she said, Michael, could you pick
Yes.
two, one?
That's it.
No, all.
All of it.
All. It's all, because this is a life to live.
Yes.
A life to live. Okay, I've got one more. It's a number that you told me about recently.
Okay.
So it's a quiz, if you remember. 1674.
The earliest presence of my ancestors in North Carolina.
Wow,
So yeah.
you're right.
Yep. And I guess another word would be Southern. Southern to me is not bound by place. It's bound by personhood.
Right.
It's bound by heritage, tradition. It rears itself when you're in a very non-Southern place. It's me in the airport in LA, headed back to DC, Virginia, and you hear somebody open their mouth and you go, "Where are you from?" "Alabama." "What part of Alabama?" "Butler County." "You from Burnt Corn, aren't you?" "Yeah, I got people down in Burnt Corn." "What's it? Who's hunting that? What time of season?" Da, 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 da. And everybody else going, "What?" Being Southern is hanging out with your friend Jake / Yaakov at a Chabad event, and while everybody else is talking Brooklyn, you're like, "Boy, when's the last time you back in South Carolina?" "Oh, back there in June." "With the blackberries out here?" "No, sir." "What da 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 da?" "How's your daddy doing? How's your mama doing?" Catfish. That. Being Southern is also, bless your heart, being Southern is also, I haven't seen her since God was a child. Being Southern is also, you thought like lit. Being Southern is a lot of expressions and ideas and ways of being and church hats and crowns and like rocking on a porch and, saying things like, "How you?" "Dry long." So it's, John the Conqueror root in your pocket, black eyed peas in your wallet. Being Southern is also understanding people, even when you don't like them. But you can understand. You get it? Being Southern is being stirred in your gut when you hear, Arthur Turner's fife and drum. Being Southern is also like, a vibe you feel in New Orleans or in Memphis. Being Southern is being at the lake trout shop in Baltimore. Being Southern is also, the same kind of experience as St. Louis or Louisville. The edges of Southern culture. It's a lot. It's an understanding about who you are in the place in the world that anybody who is Southern can identify with. And Southern is not just salt and pepper. So Southern is Vimala. Southern is people honoring Ramadan right now. Southern is people who are Sikh. Southern is people who are humanists with no religion at all. Southern is blue. Southern is not just what they want us to think it is. Southern is all encompassing.
In the last couple of days, we've met with a lot of students and had some really powerful conversations. And I was thinking about your body of literature and, how you often get questioned about your kind of credentials as a Jew. And it's so clear to me, though, especially now when I look at Rice and the Cooking Gene and Kosher Soul, that your story is so deeply Southern and Jewish because all you have to do is kind of drill down in the soil of Montgomery County, Maryland, where you grew up, or where you went to visit grandparents who were really part of the Great Migration.
Yes.
Your whole family leaves from the South, from South Carolina, largely.
Alabama, Virginia,
And
North Carolina, Georgia, Tennessee.
Sierra Leone. But once you're in Maryland, I'm just, we were in North Bethesda, Rockville a few weeks ago, and it's so Jewish, and there's such a strong Jewish presence there, and the delicatessens and the synagogues, and you see observant people walking. But it's deep Southern history. It's tobacco.
Right. It's the fact that my synagogue in Maryland, Magen David, the old Magen David was on the same ground as the Isaac Riley plantation on which Josiah Henson was enslaved. And until very recently, on the Metro map was labeled, up until 2020, labeled Uncle Tom's Cabin. And for a lot of people, they would totally cut that off. But the reality is the slaveholders in Maryland were compensated. They were given reparations to pay back for the loss of their enslaved because they were still within quote unquote union lines. They were not punished for being slaveholders. They were rewarded for being slaveholders. And so I just thought about this as I'm saying the words. I think part of the reason why you did not see some of the same patterns of strife that we identify as being uniquely Southern post-Confederates because they didn't have anybody to be angry at. Black people were still segregated, still suppressed. There were still Jim Crow laws in Maryland that were official about education, about burial, about marriage, about all this stuff. The difference was they didn't see us as an enmity because guess what? Those of us who stayed in the land were sharecroppers and tenant farmers.
Right.
So they got the best of both worlds. They were paid for the value of our bodies, and at the same point in time, they got cheap labor from us. They weren't like people in North Carolina and Georgia and Alabama who were angry that their lifeblood had been taken from them. They didn't have to kill as many of us to prove the point. They were compensated free and patted on the back. But it didn't stop, the courthouse in Rockville from having a Confederate statue until 2020. You didn't know about that, did you? It didn't stop it from being the state that Harriet Tubman came from and Frederick Douglass. I always ask people, I say all the time, I say, well, if you think I come from the North, why the hell did Harriet Tubman run so fast?
Yeah.
Why did Frederick Douglass be like, hell no? Not for no reason. But it's where we ended up also because we were part of Chocolate City. Mm-hmm. DC as this mecca for Black people trying to better themselves, who were still living on the shores of segregation, the Confederacy. I mean, my father's a blessed memory who told me about granddaddy saying to him, the minute we cross over into a Prince George's County, which was not as upwardly mobile African-American, it wasn't. Or crossing over the, whatever that bridge is, into Virginia, where you have Arlington House. Yep. Yes, that was he told my father, okay, you have to say, sir, yes, sir. Right. Like, that's real. But beyond that, it's an area full of universities. Howard, where I went to school for a bit, is there. But also you have, like I said, the communities of PG,
and then seeing all the new waves of immigration.
Yes, new waves of immigration
that you grew up with. I mean, I think it's the kind of the most like an iconic Southern place because it's so contemporary of the American experience, but it's also got this deeply, it's indigenous history.
That's right.
It's colonial history.
And of course, I didn't realize this until I became involved in living history museum work, and people would come from Alaska and California to the East Coast on these American heritage history trips. I didn't realize it was a thing, and I was like, oh, I grew up around this. I grew up around Annapolis, St. Mary's, Jamestown, Williamsburg, Monticello, Montpelier, you name it, or even over in a day trip to Philadelphia. I grew up around this. I didn't have to go across the country at thousands of dollars to experience the heart of American history. I mean, that's just part of what I grew up in. And I had these academic institutions. I had, a landed Black creative and intellectual class, immigrant communities, Farsi and Vietnamese and Hmong and empanadas and pupusas and kebe and injera. And I mean, that was all part of the world I grew up in. And then, of course, there was also the world of granddaddy, upcountry rural South Carolina, the world of my maternal grandparents, Alabama, the world of my paternal grandmother, the Tobacco Belt of Virginia, Farmville. I mean, my father could have been one of the kids who didn't get to go to school for 10 years had my grandmother not made the decision to migrate out of Prince Edward County, Virginia, where we had been enslaved since the 1700s. So all of that makes the Jewish community in the DC area is particularly interesting because it's a blend of a lot of people who came to DC directly, people who bounced off of Baltimore, people who were from other places who came to northward, people who came southward. There's a saying that Washingtonians of various stripes have. It goes something like this, depending on where in the Washington, D.C. area you live. This is as far south as I will go and as far north as I will go. And you know who they are based on how they say that and what they say. It is it. I ain't going. And so both of those mentalities surround you. So when I say Magen David, I'm talking about a synagogue where people, Moroccan, Persian, Syrian, Tunisian, Algerian, Indian Jews, Ethiopian Jews, all the above. And a lot of Israeli Jews who prefer the Sephardic rite and custom and Hagim. But also like right now I live in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and there's like one little synagogue that's for everybody. But it's on 95. It's a crowded area. It's not a small area, but there are no Jewish people. But in the DC area proper, there are like 40 to 50, very thriving synagogues of different branches of Judaism. You throw a pebble, you hit a conservative shul or Orthodox shul. You can cross, Rockville, a lot of conservative shuls, and DC, a lot of reform shuls. Wheaton, Silver Spring, and Potomac, Orthodox. Everybody walks on Saturday. So I grew up on the edge of Kent Mill, which is a neighborhood area of Silver Spring and Wheaton, which is now almost completely Bat Shiva. You know Bat Shiva? It means somebody who's like someone who has come back to Judaism but has chosen to be very religious and observant. So it used to be people who had survived the Shoah. When I was growing up, there were still a lot of survivors in my community. That was a thing, or people who had actually immigrated to Ellis Island or right before. And now they have all passed away. But the people who live in that community are largely middling and young families with children and grandchildren who have big families, and there's several kosher stores and grocery stores like you've never seen in North Carolina. And that's the world that I grew up in, and that's the world that I matured in and taught in for many years.
So can you speak for a minute about that intersection, the intersection of the deep study that you've done into Judaism and Jewish life and Jewish text and language and history, and then it crosses somewhere along there with food, but also with the dive into those historical sites that you were talking about, historical interpretation as another expression of your teaching.
So when I taught Orthodox Conservative Reconstructionist Renewal Independent Havara. Did I say reform in there? I hope I did.
Yep.
And Hebrew school for 15 years. And a lot of them, half the time, it was 7th grade. And that was enough. Every gray hair in my head. And these were, in 7th grade, there's two main goals. One, get them through their bar and bat mitzvah. Get them the Shabbat morning service and Friday night service, they should know that. And teach them about the Shoah, the Holocaust. And I just saw how rickety it was. It was never really, I love the 6th graders. I loved what happens after 8th grade,
Yeah.
because those kids are like, oh, hell, I got to become an adult eventually. Whereas 7th and 8th grade Hebrew school students don't give a damn. There's an old joke in American Judaism. How do you get rid of mice in a synagogue? You give them a bar mitzvah, which is funny but sad.
Yeah.
So I was lucky because I actually had a really awesome mentor in my life, Alyssa Kaplan, from Valdosta, Georgia. And Alyssa and I had like a lot of conversations. She brought me in to teach about the Silk Road. And she's like, oh, absolutely, you gotta. Then I stayed. And she was like, we would have these conversations. Her husband was from Hendersonville, North Carolina. So I was nurtured by Southern Jews who were living in the DC area. And I dare say that everybody who hired me had a connection to Black people. Alyssa's family had the Jew store on the other side of the tracks. Mm-hmm. So when she told me, she said her family's store was on the other side of the tracks, and people were still majority sharecroppers, tenant farmers. Right. And when she was a little girl, that was at the time of the Brown decision. So she could barely remember people talking about that. But she said to me, she says, I know what it's like not to be the all-American girl on the float, because I was the Jewish girl with the dark hair and the different features, and that wasn't me. Her husband barely eked out existence in Hendersonville, but he passed more than she did in Valdosta. And so teaching about the Shoah to the 7th graders in various synagogues, especially at Beth Ami, like I said, all of my really great bosses were also people who brought me in, were people who had Black family. Judy Treby, blessed memory. Now her grandchildren are grown. When I started teaching, they were babies, and now they are grown Black Jewish kids. It's extraordinary. But they had me every day to look at, and not feel isolated, and not feel different, not feel strange. And that same thing went for all the kids who were Asian American, Latin. I taught one family, the mom was full-blood Kiowa Comanche, the husband was Moroccan Jewish. So I was there for a reason, I believe. There were a lot of kids who looked at me. A lot of my kids, most of my boys were Indian, Caribbean, and Jewish. And they had somebody to look at every day that reminded them that they did not have to fit a mold. They could be themselves. One of my girls, Brendel, I can't forget her, because her father was Black, and his family was from North Carolina. And I remember she brought in her family tree for a project, and I brought in mine just to make her feel like we have something in common. And teaching them about the Shoah was hard because, in DC, we'd end up at the Holocaust Museum. And the first time I went, I was just annoyed. I was like, this is not working, because these kids didn't get it. So I totally revamped everything, and I said, my class can have a completely different experience walking into the museum as anybody. I said, we're not gonna all go as one group. My class is gonna stand back. So we come up the elevator, we go into the first part of the main exhibit. There's a huge map on the wall, and I'm just like, everybody had to tell me where the people were from, which is a very Black thing to do. Looking at that map, what county y'all from? Where are you from? This is where your people's land was. This is where we were enslaved. This is where we came, that kind of orientation. And then the part of the exhibit talks about the connection between Jim Crow and the Nuremberg laws and anti-Semitism, watching the film on anti-Semitism, asking them these questions, the connection between of all kinds of prejudice about what the Germans did in Namibia and what the Germans did in Germany. And so I reoriented them, but also I had to find new ways to teach about the Shoah. So our good mutual friend and acquaintance, Cara da Silva, blessed memory, who I knew personally, she had a book called In Memory's Kitchen.
Right.
So I was inspired to talk about food and learn about food and teach about food. And they didn't understand that there was a whole history before the Shoah. Like, it was like this thing came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, 6+ million Jews were exterminated. I was like, no, that's not how it went down. People lived in these communities for 1,000 years or more, 500 years, 300 years. They were landed, grounded communities. And teaching them that and asking them to bring in stories and connect with their family eventually led to me asking the question, what happens if I interrogate my own self? Being African American, being black, being of African descent, about what my ancestors, if they were able to write down their stories and tell their stories and communicate what they went through food, how would that work? And that was the same time that I was also volunteering and working with Tony Cohen, who is black, not Jewish, even though his name was Tony Cohen, but of Jewish descent on both sides of his family, actually. And working through living history and doing stuff at CW. And so those two worlds converged. When I met Marcie, it was because Joe Nathan and I were working together for the Smithsonian, and I was the main person for Jewish Washington. And she said, I have this friend, I think you should come hear her presentation. And this is before smartphone. She said, if you were not there, I'm leaving your ass. And so I had to be there on time, which I never am. And then I hopped into this car, and this one is sitting right there. And then I'm like, okay, nice. And then I go into this presentation, and Marcie talks about her grandmother's recipe file and box, and all of a sudden there's this beautiful, you have this beautiful booklet that you did from Southern Jewish Historical Society, the first iteration of matzo ball gumbo in a way. And I was like, wow, I can write about food and talk about food for a living, and talk about people's stories in food, and tell cook the food and bring the food back to life, people's stories back to life. Because these two ladies were doing that in their own right. I didn't think of her as a grad student, I thought of her as a professor. Like, there was no grad student to me. It was like, wow. Because in my world, unfortunately, for a lot of black folks, a lot of people of color, you can't get a degree in your culture. Go be a lawyer, a doctor, a writer. You can't get a degree in your culture. Who cares? No one cares about that. That's all I ever heard, y'all. And so, but it's different in the Jewish world where we do have professional Jews across the board. Teachers, rebbeim, social workers, museum people. It's a thing because our culture relies on a lot of knowledge. Every culture does, but our culture takes it to the level of there have to be people who are specialists who lay people can consult and interact with to understand the path, cultural or religious, of being a Jew, or the social cultural part of being a Jew. And I think that people need to understand. Also, food plays a sacred role in both communities. So there are certain conventions, but I joked with the group today. I was like, Passover is basically, we had a really bad meal 3,500 years ago. We're still complaining about it. Just like, ugh, it was stale.
But it's so Jewish
Yes.
that you turn the symbolic foods into something delicious.
And, interesting and awkward. So, for example, so the whole ritual of the blood, right? Like, Dom, blood, frogs, death of the firstborn. You know what that comes from? It's gonna blow your mind. It's so when the Seder is not a direct copy of what happened in the Torah, which is literally take a sheep, give it to God, take one part of it, roast it, tell your kid on that day the story, eat it with bitter herbs and leavened bread. So basically have some shawarma. If you think about it, that's all it is, it's shawarma. no tzatziki, no treif. So, the next time you go to Kava or whatever you go to, you think about that. I'm eating the original, yeah. So that whole finger in the blood thing, it comes from a Greco-Roman erotic game. Isn't that some shit? So basically, like at the Seder is designed around the symposium. These Greco-Roman philosophical dinners where you would lay on pillows and talk about lofty things, get really drunk, and then sleep with everybody. And then you would take what at the end of the night when you were really plastered, think about that, 4 cups of wine, you're really plastered, then these elite gross men would take their wine goblet and flick it at the boy or girl, their phoebe, between the ages of 16 and 20, servant that they wanted to have. So rabbis were like, that's not very kosher. Let's make it awkward and slightly less interesting. So blood, frogs, plagues, animals. But guess what? For 3,500 years, our children are still looking for the afikomen. 99% of all American Jews celebrate Pesach and will go to more than one Seder. And it is our family reunion, our Thanksgiving, and our Christmas all rolled into one. And even though we may not be able to stand matzah, which we still call the bread of affliction, and if you've ever eaten matzah for a week, you understand why. It is still one of the most important things. And in that ritual, we say the words, now we are slaves, not we were, but right now, next year, may we be free. This ritual is so important that the Dalai Lama asked Jews from every movement to come teach him how to have the same kind of ritual so that the Tibetans could eventually, hopefully, return to Lhasa, their Jerusalem. And it's a flexible construct. I guess we could talk about that, maybe. So the African American Seder plate, right? So this is not just me, this is other people as well. But, I did my homework, and you can read it for yourself. But I made sure that this was something, I want to be part of my legacy. And now we have Asian American Jews who have their own kind of Seder plate, and other folks who are doing the same kind of thing of repurposing what is not an appropriation. Letziat Mitzrayim, exodus from Egypt, is not, copycat by other people. It's actually an open invitation for anybody and everybody who's marginalized and oppressed to leave the narrow place and into a place of freedom and expansiveness. So in the spirit of that Judaism, and I realize there are other Judaisms and other Jewish experiences which are much more closed, parochial, and not open to the stranger. I'm talking about the Yahadut that I ascribe to, which is very progressive, very traditional, but also very mindful of the fact that we have to be an Am Segula, not because we're special and better, but because we're special, and the biggest gift we can give the world is ethical monotheism. There's a difference. So for me, every year at Pesach, this is on my table as well as a traditional Seder plate, because I bring my ancestors to those experiences. The kippas that we have in the house have James Baldwin and Zora Neale Hurston and Jackie Robinson and Audre Lorde on them. The challah cover is from Ghana. The talits are from Ghana, Ethiopia, Sierra Leone. I try to incorporate all the different parts of myself, including the table. I guess I can run through very quickly the food choices and why the food choices. I don't want to preempt the question, but while it's on my brain because I have ADHD, it's really critical for me. And early on, through living history and through folklore, yes, I do believe in mastering traditional ways of doing things. So to make the traditional cholent, even though I can't stand cholent, to do
Describe what cholent is.
cholent is chili without flavor.
Slow cooked.
I mean,
Sabbath
some
stew.
people will say, "Nah, I love it." It is heavy and it is something. It's in its most traditional sense. Cholent is off fatty parts of beef, maybe a handful of onions, potatoes, buckwheat, beans. And crock pot time. If you're Jewish, there's no chance you don't have more than 3 crock pots in your house. I promise you. It's just a way of life. But to me, it's not my thing. But I did learn how to do all these things. Dafina, which is the Moroccan equivalent, with sweet potatoes and rice and other things. And you keep going. So for me, being in the intersection of all these different Jewish cultures in the DC area, and then making my little pilgrimages to New York, I often would go to Chabad, and I would go to these bring-ins, and I would be maybe one of 10 black people in the room, but hearing in Yiddish, and most of it's nigunim, people singing and swaying and drinking and clapping. And I'm gonna tell you something. You wonder why do you find yourself in this space? Because I'll be really real with you. I'm no different from any other young man. You want brotherhood. You want connection. You want the feeling that you own your maturation process. And there is an expression in Hasidus called zveikus, which comes from Hebrew devek, which means glue, which means you're literally bonded to the Spirit of the Lord, which is a very black thing, ain't it? To be caught up in the clapping and swaying and singing to the point where you get the Holy Ghost. I know that for some people, that's a weird juxtaposition between Hasidus and almost a black Pentecostal or Afro-Baptist way of looking at the world. But if you tear out the labels, it's not very different. There's two trains running, but they run about the same speed. And so for me, I had to work out for myself how to make all of those corners congruent. And I didn't really see the difference. I got to the point where I was particularly enough not to dishonor any part of the story, but relativist enough to understand how much people had in common. My grandmother used to call Sunday dinner a feast for God. Well, how's it different from the Shabbos table? She always put out candles. My grandfather would say, "Hazel, do you think you're born to purple?" Which is a very Southern expression. In other words, too rich for our blood. No. Family here. God is here.
Michael, what else do you think? I guess I'm thinking of big things, big happenings, big events that Jews and blacks share together.
We have a particular relationship with food and family and hospitality that is unique to us. Like I said, I grew up in a very multicultural area with a lot of different cultures, and I will even pinpoint Indian subcontinent, Chinese, and Italian. And I promise you, not like the Jews and the black folks. Jewish people and black people do the same damn thing at every dinner. We talk about what we're going to eat next. And what we've already had before. That is the main type of conversation. Also, we eat things that are very odd because they help us eat other things that are very tasty, but if we ate them on their own, people think we were crazy. Case in point, Jewish food, Ashkenazi food in particular, gefilte fish. Gefilte fish is not a food, it is an excuse to eat horseradish.
Right.
It is a vehicle for horseradish. Chitlins is not a food. It is an excuse to drink hot sauce. But if you drank hot sauce and ate horseradish, they'd say you're Meshuggah, and they'd put you away. So you eat these other odd, foul things, and then you tell, incredibly odd stories about them. So the child will inevitably go, Zeta, why do we have to eat gefilte fish? When the Tsar was in Russia, and your grandfather was the Tsar, he had a choice. Eat gefilte fish or fight on the front line for the Tsar. Which one do you want? Black people. Granddaddy, why we eat these chitlins? Because we was in Mississippi on the plantation, all the slave master gave us eat was chitlins, and that we made it into a delicacy and called it soul food. Both stories are bullshit. But when you're a kid, you don't know the difference. But it's amazing that these stories are told in light of narratives of oppression, marginalization. And the house has a certain smell. I'm not kidding about the collard greens meets challah, meets this, meets that. Black folks and Jewish folks always smell like chicken. And I love it. It's an aphrodisiac to me at this point. Because, like you don't smell like chicken, you're not my mishpacha. Like, I can add Puerto Ricans in there too, but that's another chapter for another day. But, like, for real, like, there is a certain, I never forget going to, like, the Chabad Children's Museum before it opened in Brooklyn, and they had the most amazing thing. It was like a Febreze that smelled like fresh challah. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God, I need that as a cologne. And I'm just like, that, I mean, to us, the bread, like Jerome, I'll never forget you telling me about your grandmother's fresh bread was brioche. And I'm just like, that kind of thing. Our grandmothers pride themselves on these special festival breads and holiday breads. And, in the Sephardic community in particular, I love cooking with those ladies because that was, I don't know, it was a party in the kitchen.
Oh, so
it was
so
like,
beautiful.
get 3 or 4 Sephardic ladies and some alcohol, it's going to be a riot real quick. And the spices and the sweet smelling things and the rose water.
They're warm climate people.
Yes, warm climate people.
Claudia Roden said.
Yes. All of that comes into play. So, when I translate that, I can make you black potato salad, and I can make you Jewish potato salad. They are not the damn same. One is certainly going to have some of Karen's carrots and peas in it. But that's very Russian, right? And dill. We never had dill in the Southern potato salad. Never. I don't care what Southern Living told you. But potato salad. Okay, cool. My mama's version, my grandmama's version, and then what I learned, Ashkenazi and Israeli community, Israeli pickles, all that kind of stuff, whatever. Then I can make you Michael's Afro-Ashkefardi potato salad, which omits the peas and carrots, but does have preserved lemon. Mm. It does have the Hungarian paprika. It does have, maybe a touch of sumac. So there's all of those elements. The brisket is West African brisket. Everybody told me they love the West African brisket. It was published in the New York Times and now in the book. And they were like, wow, everybody loves the recipe because it's hard to get us to another thing about blacks and Jews in food, it is hard to get us to diverge from what we grew up with. If it's not the way so-and-so did it, it doesn't exist. So most American Jews will tell you brisket means the condiment which I cannot stand the most, starts with a K, ends with a P, onion soup, or it could be tomato paste or tomato sauce, onion soup, and something else, and you bake it till it's dead, and then that's it, right? There's no other exceptions. So for people to say that they like my West African brisket with the suya and yaji spice and the bell peppers and tomatoes and onions and garlic and turmeric means the world to me. Because when they eat that, Marcie, what they're doing is they are tasting what my mind and soul feel about the food. I have to say this part real quick. So Marcie's work I had to really dig through deep because I understood that people might make a lot of comparisons between what I'm doing and what she has already archived and made a really special place in our cultural memory for. But what's interesting what I found out is that You know, the Southern Jewish way of fusing things and mixing things is an endangered cuisine because kids did not stay. They moved on from Montgomery and Birmingham and sometimes Atlanta. Other people moved in, but they're not adopting those dishes. They're not being passed on. They live in congregational cookbooks. And Mrs. Covert, who I met separately in Louisiana, who wrote 3 beautiful kind of like community style cookbooks, Creole, Southern, and Cajun, and all kosher. But you know, it's like what happens when you have kusha, right? Sweet potato pumpkin. What happens when you have yams for the simmus and mix it up a certain way? She was very open with me and basically said, we learned how to become Americans through the black ladies on Dryad Street.
Right.
And she was very open about the fact that their Americanness came from their association with black people, which you're going, oh, well, of course, that sounds very nice. Until you talk to white folks nearby Mississippi who pretend as though they didn't get nothing from us, we didn't get nothing from them. Even though you ask them, what'd you have for Sunday dinner, baby? Well, okra and black-eyed peas and rice and fried chicken. Okay. So you don't know nothing about no African Americans, no Africa, right? That's cute.
Well, you know, the Southern accent of Southern Jewish food is a black voice.
Right. And the very fact that Mrs. Covert was very willing to talk about that and tell that story.
Right, as a working person.
Yes, is part of Yahadut as well, American Jewish experience as well.
Right.
I'm not saying that the American Jewish community doesn't have issues with race, class, gender, anti-blackness, etc. I'm just saying that the ability to say, I identify with the other.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I've been living with the other for 300 years and still can't admit that they've impacted my speech, my music, my dance, my religion, my food, my everything. Can you imagine being from Natchez, Mississippi? Your two greatest musical figures that you have were both Jimmy Rogers and Elvis Presley. Both said they learned how to play guitar from a black man. Your other major figures, B.B. King and many, many others, gave your state its state music. I asked these white folks, I said, look, when you were young, let me guess, who was your first playmate? It was Miss So-and-so's child who worked for your family, right? Mm-hmm. And let me guess, until you were about 5 or 10 years old, you wore a little string around your neck with a pierced nickel, right? And had a rabbit's foot in your pocket. And when she babysat you, she took you to the black church across the tracks and down the river, right? And when's the last time you had roast beef and Yorkshires and jellied eel, since you're so British? And all them preachers you have on TV, every single one of them preach black. I don't care if it's Joel Osteen or Joyce Myers, the preaching style is black. So please don't tell me that you've been on some velvet rope segregation Jim Crow line your whole life and don't know nothing about it. You're the blackest white people in America, maybe even in the world.
I'm gonna quote you from your writing for a minute, and then I want to open it up, and we'll take about 10 minutes. I'd love to hear if folks have questions or conversation to have with Michael. But I've been so moved by your writing. You're such a fine writer, and both Cooking Gene and Kosher Soul and Rice are marked up throughout the whole books for me because you just seem to say it all. But this is from Cooking Gene. Jewish food and black food crisscross each other throughout history. Both are cuisines where homeland and exile interplay. Ideas and emotions and ingredients, satire, irony, longing, resistance, and you have to eat the food to extract the meaning. The food of both the diasporas depend upon memory. The food is an archive, a keeper of secrets. But you also talked about in Kosher Soul as well that in addition, what blacks and Jews share, black shame, Jewish guilt, the disaster of slavery, colonialism, Jim Crow, systemic racism, mass incarceration of the Holocaust, anti-Semitism and racism, as we talked earlier, bedfellows, the miracle of still being here.
Right. They tried to kill us, we won, let's eat.
Let's eat. A sense of comedy, black comedians, Borscht Belt comedians,
The fact that every rabbi is a comedian, every black comedian is a preacher.
yeah. That being black and being Jewish and being Southern and Jewish is not an anomaly or a rare thing. So let me open it up and see if you've got any comments or questions from folks. Thank you. Let me repeat the question really quick so everybody can hear. How common is it that Michael is really kind of forced to pick one identity of the many that make him the incredible person he is, or feels that pressure?
I see it as a toolbox. The self-assured person you see is a product of 20 years of serious wrestling and wrangling. And I use the word wrestling on purpose because our father, Yaakov Avinu, wrestled with the angel to understand who he was. Remember, he walks around with a limp the rest of his life because he wrestles with the angel. Well, he's a cocky kid, and he has to fight for the woman he wants to marry versus the woman he's forced to marry. And he has all this dysfunctional ass family that he's very bad at maintaining until he wakes up one day and is forced to mature and has this come to God moment in the wilderness as he wrestles. And so our nickname for people are the God wrestlers, the strugglers, not just striving with God, but wrestling with God. So I wrestle with people all the time. So I used to play those games. I don't play them anymore. You get what you get. Because back in the day, I remember one time I was in Baltimore and I went to one of the senior centers. If you know Baltimore, you know the senior centers are basically black, Jewish. And so I would come in there and all the older Jews one time was the Jewish part and all the older black folks was all the black part. And so it was a really weird push-pull between, and they did it in such a passive-aggressive way. So tell us more about what you make for Hanukkah, black folks. So where are your people from? It was a push. They did not, it was like, I noticed commonalities. I noticed the ways that both black folks and Jewish folks, as storytellers, entertainers, and artists, have embraced queer people, but also the ways they reject them are very similar. Yeah, that's deep. When they love you, it's a very compassionate love. When they hate you, it is a deep cut in both worlds. And sometimes sometimes queerness did not make place for Jewishness. That doesn't get talked about very much. And queerness often does not make place for blackness or black men except as sexual fetishes. So how do you take 20 plus years, 30 years to figure out all of that stuff that you didn't ask for? And it can be very painful and alienating, and it makes most people give up, which is why most people are not open about their intersectional identities, because it is so exhausting. God help me if I was a woman. Dr. Sandra Lawson is a rabbi, is openly gay, is a woman, military chaplain, veteran, here in North Carolina, all those levels of identity. But I know people who are black in trans and rabbinical school. Like, wow. If you thought I was the phoenix and the unicorn, just wait. But I mean, I hope that the blueprint that some of us have been able to put out into the world and lay down of vulnerability and the boundaries that we've expressed will help the next generations of people be even more so assertive about who they are and who they were meant to be. Because it's tough. It's really tough when people don't want the whole of you in a space. Or like I joked about me and Jake talking earlier, but yes, I'm for being for real. Both, people of Southern heritage in a space where they only really want one part of you in your Jewish identity. All due respect to Chabad Lubavitch. But like in that particular space, we were talking Southern. And we were speaking English. People were looking at us like we were speaking an entirely foreign language. And here we are, both in our little black hats and our beards, about the same age, both Jews, but also both Southerners. And so I just want people to be able to be their whole self in any space they're given. Last part of the answer to your question goes like this. We're in a multicultural society, among many. If you are in this culture and you are not happily contaminated with your neighbor's culture, you are wasting your Americanness and the opportunity that you've been given to be born in America or be in this country. It is an opportunity to learn about Kerala and Goa. It's an opportunity to learn about Napoli and Abruzzo. It's an opportunity to learn about County Kerry and Belfast. It's an opportunity to learn about what it means to be Salagi and Dine and Haudenosaunee. I love that. The part of America that I love the best, and the reason why this is the only place where I'm possible, is not the jingoism, it's not the exceptionalism. It's the fact that we have striven together, we wrestle with each other, we love each other, we hate each other, and we try the best to understand each other at our best. That's the America that I love, the fact that I've been able to learn from the entire planet without leaving my country. And that's all I want us to be able to do is to affirm the fact that we are meant to be multicultural, intersectional beings in a place with such diversity.
As you were saying that, I thought it's so interesting to see you with students on campus and, the generation that they are, and they don't think about their first thought is not, do I interrogate this person? Do I critique this person? Do I surveil this person?
Mm-hmm.
Do I inflict violence on this person? Or do I just listen? And do I love them?
Mm-hmm.
Do I meet? What's not to accept?
Right.
There's such a different space that I see, which gives me a little hope, a lot of hope. Any other? Yeah, Arthur. Thanks, Kelly. We might need to flip it on.
I'm curious about your African experiences and this group of people, I believe in Uganda, who have been rediscovered, and whether there are any lingering, what we might call Jewish folk foodways amongst them, whether in the sense of the conversos, you talked about conversos, and people would say, but I remember my grandmother wouldn't eat pork,
Right.
that sort of thing. So whether there's that kind of remnant, if you've encountered this sort of, I don't want to say lost tribe, but this sort of isolated tribe.
Well, if you in West Africa, there are a lot of. I haven't really been to one place where there aren't these narratives. Ghana has a thriving Jewish community, and Sefu Wiaso. Nigeria has several Jewish communities. Uganda certainly has one. In fact, I will give honor to Shoshana Nambi, who also won a National Jewish Book Award for her children's book on Sukkot in Uganda. Unfortunately, I will not be visiting Uganda anytime soon for many reasons. But I'm going to say that, for example, in Senegal, we went to a place called Sali Portudal, which is obviously corruption of Portugal. And I was there without knowing much of anything. And I noticed something. People, the men in particular, kept on like doing this interesting thing where they would like touch the doorposts. And I was like, that's interesting. Then I went home and learned that this was an outpost of the Portuguese. But guess who came there? People who were fleeing the Inquisition. And there is an actual history of Judaism and Jewish culture in everywhere the Portuguese went. So Guinea-Bissau, Equatorial Guinea, Congo, Senegal, parts of Ghana. But not just that, there are Mizrahi Jewish histories in West Africa, and there are indigenous Jewish histories in West Africa, and Jewish histories in Southern Africa among the Lemba, and in Ethiopia, and in Sudan, and Eritrea. And it's like, the problem is, I call it's the mosaic problem. So let's say, for example, you can see what the mosaic is of a, like parts of an elephant. You say, oh, there's the trunk, there's the ear, but you don't get the full picture. Because time and space and things have clouded that picture.
Michael, let me get one more question.
Sure, but I should say this real quick.
Sure.
What people need to understand is that your question was very respectful and very direct. The problem is that reason why I did not write in Kosher Soul an entire ass history of Black Jewry in the world from A to Z is because, number one, I don't want people trying to pull down my tent because they want to prove to me that you don't exist or you're not valid enough. Okay? That's not what I want. The other part of it was, I think we can have a better perspective in history and understanding of Jews of African descent in the world if people who are well studied, who are multilingual, can put their brains together. I think there's a lot we don't know, a lot we assume. Oh, they didn't get that. Yeah, I'm so sorry, but a large part of the Torah takes place on the African continent. And the very moment that Moshe is in the bulrushes, do you really think that Moshe was Charlton Heston? I don't think so. Who is Zipporah? Zipporah is his wife, Akushi, the Ethiopian. Who are his nephews? Panahas. You know what that means? From Egyptian, means the Nubian. Y'all know what I'm trying to say. It says in the Torah, we are an Erev Rav, which means we are a mixed multitude. Mm-hmm. We are a product of all the people that lived in the Fertile Crescent, the Nile Valley, and beyond. And we became an Erev Rav no matter where we went in the world. We're Yemenites, we're Indian, we are Italians, we're all of it. So.
We've got maybe time for one
Okay,
question now.
so one of our virtual attendees wants to know, did you basically teach yourself to cook at the beginning of your career, or who taught you to cook? And then if you can also tell us your next book and when people can pre-order.
Oh, Lord. It's like, God bless them. First of all, let's order Kosher Soul while you got a chance. Second of all, it's like the grandparents. So when's the next baby coming? Do you understand I got one of them scribbling on the walls, the other one crying, keep me up all night, and you want another baby? Y'all better go, you rent a baby. Get a puppy, something. No, I do appreciate that. The next book in this trilogy, which is not going to be my next book, is about queerness in the kitchen, LGBTQ identity, and cooking and food. Beautiful. But it's going to take me a minute because it's a lot of interviews, it's a lot of interaction with people, it's and also a lot of respectful work. I was speaking to one of the students today about her work, brilliant work on queerness in the kitchen, and it's about defining terms. It's also about, I had to struggle with, am I limiting this story to gay men? And then I was like, well, if I do that, people ain't gonna like that. But if I do everybody, I'm not gonna be able to give certain people's stories justice. So I'm trying to figure out a balance, include everybody, non-binary folks, trans folks, elders, younger people, the whole narrative. Queer cooking cooperatives and groups and restaurateurs. We have our own Bill Smith and many people who have different stories to tell. And of course, the stories of James Beard, right? Gay man. Or Craig Claiborne, Bill Neal. You can't tell the story of food in America without the story of gay people, queer people.
Okay, you have
Who taught me how to cook?
1 minute.
Everybody. Everybody. And also, I didn't just, okay, so I watched people. I watched my grandmother's hands. I watched my mom's hands. I cooked with my father. You know, all of that kind of good stuff. There wasn't one person. When I was at my friends' houses growing up, no matter what ethnicity they were, I was often drafted into the kitchen. So that and Saturday PBS cooking shows.
beautiful.
You know, all of that stuff. So that's me.
Let's thank Michael Twitty. So grateful to all of y'all for being here. We're so grateful to you, Michael, for making this one of your journeys, and appreciate you being an activist and a teacher, a loving teacher with our students and faculty. And you're going to be out front signing Kosher Soul.
Yep, thank you.
Great. Thank y'all for coming.